Title: The Man Who Stayed Gentle. When life got loud, some people are not gentle because life has been easy. They are gentle because life gave them every reason not to be. This is the story of a man who moved through one ordinary day without becoming what the day tried to turn him into. His name was Daniel. He was not impressive in the obvious way. He did not speak loudly. He did not dominate rooms. He did not turn every small inconvenience into proof that the world was against him. Most people who met him would have called him calm. But calm is a word people often use when they do not know how much effort something costs. Daniel's calm was not empty. It had been built slowly, through bills paid late, through apologies he never received, through mornings that began before he felt ready, through conversations where he could have been cruel and chose not to be. He lived in a small apartment on the 5th floor of a brick building near a busy road. In the morning, the city always arrived before he did. Buses sighed at the curb. A delivery truck reversed with a sharp repeating beep. Someone upstairs dropped something heavy. A phone vibrated on the kitchen table before the kettle had even finished boiling. Daniel stood barefoot on the kitchen floor and watched the steam rise from his cup. The message on his phone was from work. Another change. Another urgent request. Another problem that had somehow become his responsibility before breakfast. He read it once. Then he placed the phone face down. Not because he did not care, because he had learned that the first reaction is often not the truest one. He took one breath, then another. Outside the window, the morning sky was pale and tired. A man shouted at someone in the street below. A horn answered. A dog barked twice. The day was already asking people to become harder. Daniel put on his dark coat, picked up his bag, and left. In the hallway, his neighbor was struggling with a stroller and 2 grocery bags. One of the bags had split slightly at the side. The neighbor looked embarrassed, angry, and close to saying something sharp to the child standing beside her. The child was not doing anything wrong. He was only moving too slowly for a morning that had no patience. Daniel stopped. "Here," he said, taking the lighter bag first so she would not feel helpless. She looked at him quickly, still tense. "I have it," she said. "I know," Daniel answered. "I'm just making the hallway less annoying." The sentence was small enough to let her keep her dignity. She breathed out. The child looked up at Daniel. Nobody said anything meaningful. There was no speech about kindness, no lesson, no warm music. Only 3 people in a narrow hallway, and one moment that did not become worse. That was often how Daniel helped the world. Not by fixing it, by refusing to add more damage to it. Outside, the air smelled like wet asphalt and diesel. At the crosswalk, a cyclist cut too close and nearly clipped Daniel's bag. The man on the bicycle turned his head and shouted as if Daniel had been the one moving too fast. Several people looked over. Daniel felt the old heat rise in him. It came quickly. A sentence formed in his mind, perfectly sharp, perfectly deserved. For 1 second, he wanted to give it away. Then he looked at the cyclist's face, noticed the red eyes, the tense jaw, the backpack hanging half open, the fear hidden under the aggression. So Daniel said nothing. The light changed. He crossed the street. A woman beside him muttered, "I would have said something." Daniel gave a small smile. "I almost did." She laughed, surprised, and that was enough. On the train, every seat was taken. Daniel stood near the doors, one hand on the metal pole, his shoulder pressed between a man with headphones and a woman holding flowers wrapped in paper. At the next stop, an older man stepped in slowly. Nobody moved at first, not because everyone was cruel, because everyone was tired. Everyone was inside something. Everyone had learned to protect the little space they had. Daniel tapped the shoulder of a young man sitting near the door. Not harshly, not as a public accusation, just enough. The young man looked up, annoyed for half a second, then saw the older man. His face changed. He stood. The older man sat down without drama. The train continued. The young man avoided Daniel's eyes for a while. Then, as the doors opened near the business district, he said quietly, "Thanks." Daniel nodded. He had not embarrassed him. That mattered. Some people only need to be reminded of their better self in a way that does not humiliate them. At work, the office was already bright in the wrong way. Screens glowed. Coffee machines hissed. People walked with papers they did not need to carry. Daniel worked in operations for a mid-sized company that had grown fast enough to forget how many quiet people were holding it together. By 10, a meeting had gone sideways. A supplier had missed a deadline. A manager wanted someone to blame. A younger employee named Mark had made a mistake in the report and now sat with both hands under the table, staring at the wall as if he might disappear if he stayed still enough. The manager's voice sharpened. "This is basic. We cannot keep having these errors." The room changed, not loudly, but everyone felt it. That moment when a correction stops being about the work and starts becoming about a person. Daniel looked at Mark. Then he looked at the manager. "The mistake is fixable," Daniel said. The manager turned to him. Daniel kept his voice even. "We can correct the report by noon. I should have checked the final version before it went out." Mark looked up. The manager exhaled through his nose. The meeting moved on. It did not become warm. It did not become easy. But it did not become a public breaking either. Afterward, Mark found Daniel near the printer. "You didn't have to take part of that," he said. Daniel picked up the pages from the tray. "I know. Why did you?" Daniel looked at him for a moment. "Because I've seen people stop trying after being corrected the wrong way." Mark did not answer. He only nodded. That afternoon, he stayed late and fixed the report carefully, not because he felt safe forever, because one person had made the room less dangerous for trying again. At lunch, Daniel went outside alone. The sky had turned gray. A thin rain moved through the streets without committing to becoming a storm. He bought soup from a small place near the corner and sat by the window. At the next table, a woman spoke sharply into her phone. Her voice was low, but every sentence carried pressure. "I understand that. I said I understand." Then she went silent. Her hand shook when she put the phone down. A waitress came with the wrong order. The woman looked at the bowl and almost broke. Daniel saw it happen. The tiny moment before a person passes pain to someone who does not deserve it. The waitress noticed the mistake and began apologizing. The woman opened her mouth. Daniel gently slid the extra napkins toward the edge of the table and said to the waitress, "I think that one might be mine." It was not, but it gave the room a different path. The waitress paused, understood nothing, then smiled with relief. The woman at the next table closed her mouth. A few seconds later, she said quieter, "Actually, I ordered the other one, but it's fine. No rush." The waitress nodded and went back. Daniel ate his soup. He did not look for thanks, but when he stood to leave, the woman said, "You gave me a second." Daniel looked at her. She gave a tired laugh. "I was about to be awful." He smiled slightly. "We all get close." She looked down at her hands. "Some people don't stop." Daniel buttoned his coat. "Some days they just need one extra second." The rain was heavier when he stepped outside. By evening, the city had become louder. Cars pressed forward at green lights. People stared into phones while walking. A man at the pharmacy argued about a prescription. A cashier apologized to a line that kept growing behind her. Daniel stood 3 people back, holding cough medicine for his sister's child. The man at the counter slammed his hand down. "This is ridiculous." The cashier's face went pale. She could not have been more than 22. Daniel felt the room tense around the scene. There is a kind of anger that recruits everyone nearby. It asks witnesses to join it. It makes silence feel like agreement. Daniel stepped forward just enough, not to challenge the man, to interrupt the shape of the moment. "Take your time," he said to the cashier. "No one here is in danger." A few people in line shifted. One older woman said, "Exactly." The man at the counter turned, ready to fight the room, then seemed to realize the room was no longer fully his. He muttered something and looked away. The cashier finished the transaction with trembling hands. When Daniel reached the counter, she said, "Thank you." He placed the medicine down. "You were doing your job," he said. Her eyes filled quickly, which seemed to embarrass her. So Daniel looked away first, giving her privacy. That was another kind of gentleness people rarely noticed, not making someone perform gratitude when they are already exposed. At home, the apartment was dim and warm. Daniel took off his coat, placed the medicine by the door for his sister to collect later, and stood for a moment in the quiet. His phone rang before he could sit down. It was his father. The conversation began normally, then became old, the way some conversations do when they find the same doorway they have used for years. His father complained about a decision Daniel had made, then about money, then about how people were different now, then about how Daniel always took things too personally. Daniel listened. The old heat returned. But this time it was not quick. It was deeper, more personal. There are strangers you can be kind to because they do not know where to hurt you. Family is different. Family often touches the bruise and calls it a conversation. Daniel walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark street. His father kept talking. A sentence came to Daniel's mouth. It was true. It was accurate. It would have landed exactly where he wanted it to land, and for that reason, he did not say it. Instead, he said, "I'm getting tired, and I don't want to become unfair with you." There was silence. His father made a small sound, half defensive and half surprised. Daniel continued, "I can talk tomorrow, not like this tonight." Another silence. Then his father said, "Fine." It was not warm, but it was not war. Daniel ended the call and stood still with the phone in his hand. He did not feel victorious. He felt tired. This is the part people often misunderstand about gentleness. They think it feels soft from the inside. Often it does not. Often it feels like holding a door closed while something inside you throws itself against it. Daniel made tea and sat at the table. Across the city, parts of his day were still moving without him. His neighbor in the hallway spoke more softly to her child on the way home. The young man on the train gave up his seat before anyone asked the next day. Mark corrected another employee's mistake without making him feel stupid. The woman in the cafe paused before snapping at someone else. The cashier at the pharmacy finished her shift without crying in the storage room. His father sat in his own kitchen, annoyed but quieter than before. None of them would call Daniel important. Most of them would barely think of him by name. But people are changed by the emotional weather around them more often than they admit. Some people make a room more dangerous. Some make it easier to breathe. Daniel did not know the full effect of his day. He only knew he had reached the end of it without becoming the worst version of himself. That may sound small. It is not small. In a loud world, staying gentle is not passivity. It is discipline. It is restraint. It is refusing to let every sharp thing that enters you come back out sharper. It is power that does not need to prove itself by damaging someone else. Before bed, Daniel opened the window slightly. The city kept making noise, a siren far away, a door closing downstairs, rain tapping against the fire escape. He stood there for a moment, tired and ordinary, one hand resting on the window frame. Tomorrow would not be easier just because he had handled today well. There would be more pressure, more careless words, more chances to become hard. But he had practiced something real. Again and again, in small rooms and crowded streets, he had chosen not to pass the pain forward. And sometimes that is how the world becomes softer. Not all at once, not through grand speeches, but through one person who has every reason to be harsh and chooses, quietly, not to be. Daniel turned off the lamp. The window held the city in blue and gold. Somewhere, someone was trying again, because the day had not broken them completely. Somewhere, someone had one less reason to be afraid. And somewhere inside an ordinary man, gentleness remained alive. Not untouched, not effortless, alive.